Gene,
Hey, Bill.
how you guys doing? All right, here we are, episode 5. Okay, we
I
have
know. Time flies.
time flies, man, and welcome back from Geneva.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a really fun and interesting trip.
Cool, and we're gonna hear all about that too today. So, thanks for joining us again on the Bioactive Nexus. We have two topics today. One is Gene's going to give us a review of kind of cool things he saw at Vita Foods EU in Geneva, Switzerland, which was the last year that it's going to be there. It was there, been there for 26 years, I think. Is that right? 26 years?
Yeah, I think so. This
Yeah.
was my first time there, so
I actually
yeah.
never went there, but anyway, it's going to be in Barcelona next year. So Gene and I were just talking before the broadcast about making our plans there, and he already knows there's a good karaoke place
I
there.
do. Yeah.
So we're going to go do that probably. Anyway, so he's going to do that, and then I'm going to jump into the next segment of our microbiome series, and that's going to be all about psychobiotics and mental wellness, which is a
Cool
huge
stuff.
emerging area. Very cool stuff, and exciting to see how that's going to grow in the next few years. It's amazing what it's done in the last 10, and it's really only been about 10. So excited to do that. We'll get into that. So again, don't forget, you can subscribe to our email list on the website. Please follow us on the LinkedIn page for the Bioactive Nexus. You can connect with Gene and I on LinkedIn, of course. And we are streaming once the live stream is done after post production. Then we have our YouTube page, and it goes up on Spotify. Which by Spotify is not just audio; you can actually watch it in video as well if you prefer. And then it goes through RSS distribution to about 7 different platforms, including Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, you name it. Pretty cool. And don't forget to send us questions, comments, ideas, things that you'd like to hear us talk about. And we're happy to do so. And the last thing, Gene, is I just want to tell our audience that I am in the job market here. So
Yes.
yes, I did a post on LinkedIn. So I invite you to go look at the details on that and what I'm looking for. But I'm looking for another position, an executive level position in the natural products industry. It could be with product brand, could be with a CDMO or ingredient supplier. So if any of you listening know of anything, please reach out to me and let me know. And Gene,
And I just wanted to add to that,
yeah,
it's not too often that an opportunity presents itself to industry where you get somebody who has sort of the breadth and scope of experience, credentials, intelligence, everything that you bring to the table. So I'm
well,
just
thanks,
saying,
man.
people out there, if you're looking
Yeah,
for somebody to head, product development or any aspect of the science, I mean,
yeah,
you couldn't possibly do better than Dr. Bill here. So,
appreciate it.
somebody's going to snap him up soon. So, jump in, see him on LinkedIn, connect, and
Please do.
yeah, talk to him.
All right. Thank you, Gene. Appreciate that.
Sure.
All right. So then let's go into our first thing. Vita Foods update. You're going to share your screen, right, Gene?
I am going to share my screen, and I
Cool.
am going to do that right now. Okay. So, um, so it's not as big as I'd like it to be, but I guess it's big enough. So this is sort of my take on what I thought were some of the interesting nutraceuticals there at Vita Foods Europe. I didn't always look for what was trending. Sometimes it is stuff that was trending. Like, for example, there was a ton of, collagens there, and which certainly are trending. But I didn't necessarily, of the ones I saw, I didn't necessarily think they were especially interesting, that one was any more interesting than another. So I didn't include it in the mix. Here's a picture I thought I'd just share with you. This is the booth I'm at as Chief Scientific Officer of Nutraland USA. They're with San Ying Shu, the president of the company. And so the first thing I want to cover is postbiotics. We've been talking a lot about just the biotics area, probiotics, prebiotics, postbiotics. And I've definitely seen, I know you have too, Bill, because we've talked about it, but over the last few years, postbiotics as a category has really grown. And the first time I heard about a postbiotic, I don't even think that term was used. I was having a visit at offices from Mitsubishi, and they were talking about a heat-killed probiotic, which I thought was a terrible name. Heat-killed, what's it do if you killed it? And then come to discover there's a number of studies that the active compounds, that there was something still left doing something, whether it was a metabolite of it or some other role it was playing, that had a very specific clinical effect. And the advantage, of course, to postbiotics is you don't have to worry about stability. You don't have to worry that the colony forming units are going to decrease because it's not alive anymore. It's a zombie probiotic. It's in a space where it's just like a prebiotic. You don't have to worry about that kind of stability, and yet you get these great effects. So I didn't take pictures of every single one I saw, but this was a booth that was directly across from us, and so I decided to take a picture of it, and it was a We Care probiotics, but they had some interesting postbiotics, and I did a little picture of a document that they offered, and I can see 5 different postbiotics that they offered in areas of weight management, immune health, digestive support, reducing inflammation due to pathogens, oral health, all in the category of postbiotic. And there was quite a number of places that had these kinds of postbiotics. And to me, it's exciting as a formulator to be able to say, hey, I could put this in a formula, not have to worry about whether that probiotic is going to play well with something else, or just create an incredible symbiotic product that had the probiotic and the prebiotic and the postbiotic and make it sort of very focused for specific areas of health. There are so many areas. We know that with probiotics. Anyway, then another interesting thing was this one here, and this was particularly interesting to me because I found out from the president of our company that our company made an arrangement, a cross-licensing agreement with a company in Japan, so that we would be the exclusive distributor of this Akkermansia. And Akkermansia is a probiotic that would, let me just back up, the exclusive distributor in the United States. It's available both as a probiotic and as a postbiotic. In this case, it's going to be the postbiotic. And it has some interesting properties.
I'm familiar with this strain, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, and it improves some metabolic disorders, reduces inflammation. It's been compared to NMN with regard to its ability to have, let's call it, healthy aging type effects. And so to me, I thought, hey, this is kind of a cool thing. And so I'm looking forward to getting a download of all the information on it and be able to understand it. I've looked at a couple of different studies on it, and it's actually quite impressive. And so including things like helping with weight loss and helping with inflammation and helping some of these different areas. So it's not new to see something helping with weight loss in the probiotic category or even in the prebiotic one, but this was sort of the first one I really saw that was a postbiotic that helped with weight loss. I'm sure there will be others out there, or there may already be.
There's other strains for that. And when I was with Sanofi, I was their biotics lead for our category, physical and mental wellness category. So I worked with my counterpart over in Asia, and we mapped out all the commercially available strains for all the various indications, whether it's digestive all the way through,
Nice.
sleep and cognitive. So lots of exciting research out there. And I'm going to delve into that a lot more here when we get to the psychobiotics. I was focused
Cool.
on the mental wellness area, so that's why I can kind of talk to a lot about that one. But we'll get into that later.
Nice. So the second thing I saw, which grabbed my attention, was omega-11. We're used to seeing omega-3, omega-6,
Omega-9.
even omega-7, omega-9,
Yeah.
but not so much omega-11, cetylaic acid. And so as I looked into it, a couple of different companies that were offering it. One was Vet Biotech, which I'm going to go out on a limb here and say is possibly a German company. Yeah.
I think Nordic region, actually.
Nordic. Yeah, it probably makes more sense.
Yeah.
And then another one, EPAX, which had a combination of
brand.
3, 9, and 11. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what grabbed my attention about it is not just that it was, an unusual omega, but that there was some research showing that it actually increased the body's ability to convert ALA into EPA and DHA. Now, I found that interesting because
So
one of the
precursor.
issues...
I mean, not a precursor or a catalyst, I guess, maybe.
A catalyst, yeah. So what happens
Catalyst,
is
okay.
if you look at...
Interesting.
You can't see it too well here, but on the screen you see some of the little bar graph there. And you basically had a 40% increase in the conversion. Our bodies aren't great at converting ALA into EPA and DHA. It'll do it, but in a very minor way, which is why if you say, well, I'm a vegetarian and I'm just going to use, fenugreek or whatever and get some ALA, well, that's good. That has some benefit, but not as much as EPA and DHA. Of course, now you can get omega, you can get EPA, DHA from algae and still have it be vegan friendly. But to me, this is a very cool element, being able to have that improvement in the conversion. So I thought, that's a little different. That's interesting, and that's worth mentioning.
That's interesting because normally you think omega-3s, obviously talk about them for a long time. They've been around from fish oils traditionally, now algae and stuff. But, how can you supplement those in your diet? You can take them and supplement them, but then there's bioavailability challenges and how much do you really get from that? So working with the body's own systems to increase the amount that gets the necessary nutrient that you need is kind of a cool approach too. And it's a good way
I like it anytime that happens where we can do something to increase our body's own production instead of just having to get it externally, I think is a cool thing. So
that's cool.
Omega-11. My next one, this isn't new exactly, but I've just seen it more. I saw it at Expo West when I was there in March, and I just wanted to mention it because with all of the hullabaloo around NMN and the legal issues and the regulatory issues and what's its status and many companies choosing not to make it anymore because it's in that regulatory no man's land right now. And then some of the different places are coming up with, hey, NMN is the oxidized form, and then you have NMNH, the reduced form. It's got a little hydrogen on it there, and that you could get your NMN in this way. And then, of course, similarly, you're taking NMN for purposes of increasing your NAD levels. That's why you're taking it predominantly. Right. And so, of course, this company also offers NAD and NADH. NADH is certainly not new. It's been around for many a year, but it's one of those things that I thought was potentially interesting for people who are looking for alternatives. What can I do? Of course, my favorite alternative isn't really sexy. It just works. And that's niacinamide, because you take 200 milligrams and research shows you increase NAD levels 30-fold in 30 minutes. And it's pennies in comparison.
Well, and there's the regulatory challenges with NMN going on in the U.S. right now. FDA's made their kind of ruling on that, right? And it's not a legal dietary ingredient for supplements.
That's the issue for so many. Yeah.
So is this company in where's this company from in EU that you saw? I'm not familiar with them.
I actually don't know where it's from. Bontac is the name of it. but easy enough to look up. So yeah,
Well,
I mean, I
interesting. I just wonder, what I haven't checked this actually, what the regulatory challenges are in Europe for NMN, but that's
yeah, I don't know.
seems not somebody selling it there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not as big a problem there. I know that only from talking to people at the
Hmm.
booth and
Right.
mentioning a material that we had for autophagy and the relationship between NAD and blah blah blah. Come to
Right.
find out, a lot of these countries don't have issues with NMN. So okay,
Interesting. All right, man.
now we talked about prebiotics. We talked about postbiotics rather. And I'm
Yeah.
not going to go over a bunch of different probiotics because everybody kind of is aware of the fact that, you can find a probiotic that'll do almost anything. People think of probiotics in terms of, okay, gut health, digestive health, immune health. But of course, we know that there's so many other areas. When I first discovered years ago that there was one that helped lower cholesterol, I thought that was amazing. You're going to talk about psychobiotics today. So there's
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
different types of probiotics that do many different things. This was just the first time I saw this one, and I thought it was interesting. So this is a specific strain of Streptococcus thermophilus. The company is Bioceutical Percheron, and they got a nice clinical study uh, on relieving dry eye,
Hmm.
which I thought was interesting, something that was unusual, and it causes a secretion of hyaluronic
I,
acid,
I don't know,
does
I
several
guess.
things in tear secretion rather. And so I thought, wow, that's a little different. So if somebody's looking at what can I do? I'm doing a formula that I need something for dry eye. You have some of your usual
You wouldn't
suspects,
think it would
omegas.
be a probiotic, actually. You'd think more of an actual
Yeah,
topical
yeah,
physical
yeah, yeah,
thing,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And yet,
No, but that's not
this
the
is an
only one,
oral.
by the way. There's one out of Japan. It's called iMuse. That's actually a probiotic for, or maybe, actually, I think it's a postbiotic for eye health. So, um,
Nice.
yeah, so that's kind of an interesting area with the research. That's very new in that area. But,
Yeah, it's a little different, and I thought
mhm.
it was worth mentioning.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Here's another one. This is from OmniActive, a big company. This is
Yep.
Alpinia galenga, and they call it N Extra. Um, and what I thought was interesting about it is this is a sort of a mental energy type of formula.
Hmm.
And it's a 300 milligram dose, and
Is that a botanical
it
extract?
is, yes, yes.
Okay.
It was oddly they were referring to it as a Thai ginger, but it just goes to show you shouldn't go by the common names like that because
Yeah, no.
my company that Nutraland offers a black ginger extract that is known in Thailand as Thai ginger. So I'm not
Okay.
sure where this one came as Thai ginger, but um, Alpinia, the research indicates that you get mental alertness benefits within an hour. Improves focus, sustained energy, that whole thing, mental energy without the caffeine crash, yada yada, very experiential. So I thought, okay, and
It's in the ginger family, Gene. As I just checked, I'm just curious. It's in the ginger family. So
okay, yeah, makes some sense. Um, so there you go. So I thought that was rather interesting because everybody's looking for caffeine alternatives, and although this isn't general energy, it's mental energy, and I think that still uh, qualifies here.
hmm.
Now, here's one that you and I had a chat about
Oh yeah,
before this,
I know these
but
guys. Yeah.
I know you do. But I happened to stop and I saw their booth and went, hey, because it was a little bit newer for me. Um, so these are sucrosomial minerals, and that's you heard of liposomes. Well, these are sucrosomes, microencapsulations of minerals using a phospholipid matrix and a sucrose esters of fatty acids to create these different minerals. And what I liked about it, the first one I heard about, and I was talking to you, Bill, about it
Yeah.
previously, was a magnesium, sucrosomial magnesium. And and we talked about in the previous show how magnesium is so, the elemental potencies of so many magnesiums are so low. You can look at
Yeah.
something like,
Well, we talked about that in our previous podcast about
that's
the
right. And so
availability of salts.
how do you get a well absorbed magnesium, really well absorbed, and still have a relatively high elemental potency? And this one was, It's like 32% elemental magnesium, which is pretty darn good.
From magnesium oxide, which is the least
from magnesium, which is 58%, but
elemental.
Elemental, right? And so with this, they have a variety of different ones, zinc and so forth and so on, just different ones. And I just took this chart that I had done that showed the increases in blood magnesium content and red blood cell magnesium content, and seeing some pretty significant improvements, and even something really popular like magnesium bisglycinate. You see that this did much better than it in blood, and actually significantly better than it in red blood cells. And so I just like the whole concept. I think it's a very cool thing, and I wouldn't be surprised if this started gaining some traction out there as alternative sources.
And they do have a ton of research. They started with iron, just so you know. That was the first mineral they started with.
Iron.
Yeah, they have a lot of research in that one. But
here in the United States, I don't know if they have all of them, but I know that MadePro has the sucrosomial magnesium.
They're the U.S. distributor for them.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Very cool.
Now, there's a few whole food-derived nutraceuticals. One of them here is this, I'm not sure what the correct pronunciation is, Nortrophil. And it's an extract of a certain kind of apple. What caught my attention is it's an Italian company, and these are plants that grow in Italy, and they actually have research on it for improving hair density and reducing hair density, meaning thickness, and preventing hair loss,
Gene, if we invented that ingredient, we'll be billionaires because,
I hear you, my friend. But I thought that was interesting because there are other ingredients that have some research on it for hair. You had your typical
fascinating
keratin materials, and even one that my company offers, which is the Mirasil spermidine, and some of those. But I thought this was interesting, something a little different. Then there's another one called Solan Red, which looks sort of like a tomato, but it's not. It's actually an eggplant. And what I found interesting about it is they've got research on it, cardiovascular health, helping reduce blood pressure, helping reduce blood lipids, helping reduce blood sugar. So sort of overall metabolic health, anti-inflammatory, weight management, antioxidant, all of these things that I just mentioned. So again, I thought that is rather interesting.
Do you think that's due to lycopene? Do you think that's one of the contributing factors?
It could be. It could be a contributing factor, but it's different than other eggplant varieties, certainly. And it has a little more of an orangey color than a red one. But so I thought, that's different. And then, of course, I couldn't not mention, when we're talking about whole food derived, Nutriland USA's Somato, which is a whole food derived melatonin from tomatoes. It's like
Somato,
about 5%.
You say Somato, I say Somato.
Somato. Okay. So, and just as an aside, we did some more, had some more analysis on it recently, and besides having the 5% melatonin, phytomelatonin, it also contains naturally occurring lycopene, GABA, quercetin, rutin, and also contains N-acetyl serotonin and 5-hydroxy melatonin. So it contains these other beneficial compounds with it. So it's kind of cool. And we had at our booth 95%, conservatively 95% of the inquiries were for this. I think a lot of it was just because a lot of countries melatonin is a drug, prescription drug, so you can't have it. But some countries are allowing a tomato extract with naturally occurring melatonin to get through.
That's going to require a novel food application, I would suspect, in EU, though.
It depends on how it is presented. There's a couple of different options we talk. And I know, like in South Korea, you can't have melatonin, but they accepted this. And so they're going
interesting.
gangbusters with it right now. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. Then I also saw an excipient that I don't always get too excited about excipients, but this interested me. Siloid XDP Silica converts oily liquids into powders without the use of solvents. You can blend it together. It's a mesoporous silica, very high absorptive capacity for oily vitamins, and you could actually take like a vitamin E oil, blend it with it, and make it into a powder, which was very
just
very
by
cool.
just by blending.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Well, that saves on solvent residues and all this sort of thing.
That's the whole. Yeah, it's the whole idea.
Yeah,
So I thought that's interesting. It's by a company called Grace, and they had a number of interesting ones, but this one was the one that I thought was particularly relevant for our industry. The ability to take an oily substance that heretofore is not available as a powder and go, it's a powder now. You know, yeah, I like black seed oil. It's pretty much an oil. You really don't get it as powder, but I bet you could take this and blend it with it. So I think that's interesting. Anywho,
cool.
So
sounds like a great show. There was probably lots of stuff to see. You probably didn't see it all.
There was a lot to see. I did not see it all, but I was working at the booth most of the time, so I just kind of got away when I could for little 30-minute segments here and there. But I thought it was worth. I think there was some interesting stuff here, and I noticed that there was less flash and more substance at this particular show, at least in my opinion.
Cool.
So,
all right, Gene. Cool.
That's my report.
All right, there we go. Vita Foods EU report. Great. Let's jump into our next big topic.
Psychobiotics.
Psychobiotics. I like that term. Okay. And mental wellness. Okay. And I'm using the term mental wellness and not mental health. There's a distinction here. Okay. Because that's kind of where things are going. Think of mental wellness as proactive, taking care of your mental health. And mental health could be a clinical condition like depression or anxiety or something like that. So I guess the first thing is let's start from the beginning on what are psychobiotics. Okay, so the term was actually coined in around 2013, so it's not anything new. It's only about 10, 11 years old here.
Right.
And at the time, it was defined as a probiotic that was conferring a benefit to mental health issues, and primarily in the clinical context, like for depression or something like that.
Sure.
So that's where it started, but most definitely that has evolved and changed, and I'm going to expand that definition today as we talk about this. So, and it's also important to call out that it's not all probiotics, and this is true for any biotic. It depends on the strain. So not all probiotics are psychobiotics, so remember that.
Right.
And the actual definition is psychobiotics are probiotics that confer mental health benefits to the host when ingested in a particular quantity through interaction with commensal gut bacteria. Okay, so that's the definition there. But then the NIH, or National Institute of Health, they came out with a publication in 2016, and they proposed expanding that definition to include prebiotics that were supporting those probiotics for, again, a psychobiotic benefit, okay, for mental health or mental wellness. And then in 2020, there's a really good review on the mechanisms of action. And that's something we're going to delve in a little more detail here. And then I'll talk about some of my experience in mapping out commercially available strains that have been clinically studied in this area. I will just, at a high level, I will tell you that when you map out the strains for various indications, whether it's digestive health, like irritable bowel syndrome, for example, which is a severe condition for people, very much connected to stress, okay, which is in the mental health side or wellness side. But then you have immune, and then you have different strains. What I found in mapping this out is that the strains that are being used in the mental wellness area are not the same ones for immune health or digestive health and those types of conditions. So it's fascinating, I think, because it just shows you the diversity of the strains, and then there's layers of that in the mental wellness area in terms of indications where people looked at. Initially, it was met with stress is usually the kind of the first thing people look at, mainly because it's related to IBS and digestive conditions, so stress and anxiety factor into that. However, that has grown and still growing today on that. And so, Gene, you've heard of the term gut-brain axis, right?
Right.
No question about that.
Well,
Well,
very clear.
and so thinking about that for a second, that's kind of been expanded in recent research in terms of, I hear it called gut-brain axis all the time, but now that's very much linked to microbiome or microbiota. So now I've seen two different terms: microbiota gut-brain MGB axis or gut-brain microbiota axis. So there's no official definition of MGB or GBM, okay, for the acronym, but and that's in the two different publications. I've seen two different referred to it two different ways. But at any rate, what we're talking about is, bottom line, is the microbiome interacting with the gut-brain axis. And, right, the gut has been called the second brain, right?
It has, indeed. Yeah.
And that's really true because everything that's going on in the gut, it's a bidirectional communication between the brain. So, and
Absolutely.
there's three different pathways for that. And so I'm actually going to share a graphic here and talk to this so it'll kind of make sense. So it's important to understand these simple contexts. And again, by the way, nobody has totally elucidated the mechanisms of action here. However, there's enough research to kind of indicate what I'm going to show you here that this is the case here. So let's look at this diagram here. You see that one?
I do.
Okay. So let's start from the left side there in terms of the three different areas, okay? Well, this is kind of from all the research up to date in terms of the different mechanisms of action. So one pathway between the gut, and we're talking between the gut and brain in all cases here, is the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, okay?
Right.
This middle one is the immune axis, or response and inflammation, okay? That, again, 70+% of the immune receptors are in the GI tract. So this was already more known than the one on the left and the right, I'd say.
Sure.
And the last one on the right is, through the production or regulation of neurotransmitters, so like GABA.
That's what I think of when I think of psychobiotics. Yeah. That's the thing that comes to my mind, because when I first got exposed to it a few years ago, it's kind of what the part that I was learning about and was fascinated by.
Right. And, serotonin, you can kind of see here that if you talk about mood and sleep, magnesium targets the GABA A receptor, and then GABA also so that has to do with mood, and then serotonin's in the melatonin biosynthetic pathway, right? So there's these neurotransmitters are really prevalent there, and they get triggered either by the gut or brain and vice versa, okay, in terms of their production. And then you also have the production on the other side of that, short chain fatty acids, right? So like butyrate and other things, small molecules that have some benefit in terms of the triggering response.
Indeed. And what's interesting is there's both the element of increasing levels of certain neurotransmitters, as you indicated, and there's also impacting certain transporter proteins like serotonin transporter protein, mRNA, and then serotonin transporter protein. There were in one study I saw on Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, you saw an increase in both of those compared to a control group after supplementation with Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. So that suggests to me that your just the transport, the utilization of those neurotransmitters are better with the use of certain probiotics. So it's not just I'm increasing production of this neurotransmitter, but I'm improving its availability vis-a-vis transport. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I already said it, I want to expand that definition. So for me, it's all biotics. So it's not just probiotics.
Yeah.
And prebiotics, because there's research in there, but also postbiotics. We've been talking about that today.
That's right.
And symbiotics, which are combinations of those, right? The traditional thinking of symbiotic is a probiotic and a prebiotic. Well, it could be a postbiotic and a probiotic, okay? In my mind, it's talking about the synergy of those two ingredients working together to deliver a benefit, and you have research on that. So I think it's important to understand that this, I'm sure IPA and the other guys are going to expand their definitions, and as more and more research comes out this, but there isn't a huge amount of scientific consensus, I would say, across the board in terms of that. We're getting closer to that, especially defining what is a postbiotic and so on. Now, on the other side of this, let's talk about mental wellness, right? So what do we mean by that? In the traditional clinical sense, you think of depression or anxiety, which are, severe conditions. So do you actually know the difference between depression and anxiety? This is a hard one to delineate. So I think it's important I wanted to kind of call
it is important, and especially because there's so much overlap. People who are depressed often have anxiety, vice versa.
Right.
So,
which makes it very challenging for when you're designing clinical studies for primary outcomes of what you're going to measure, whether it's actual biomarkers or qualitative tests that are approved for these types of studies. But anxiety is characterized by an uneasy feeling about the future, or a fear and uncertainty. It's not really quantitative, but it's just a feeling that somebody has about something. But depression is a serious mood disorder, okay? And it has severe symptoms like, sad and anxious mood, pessimism, irritability, fatigue, and then also it affects sleeping patterns and also suicidal thoughts as well. So depression is quite severe. So one of the reasons that, on the drug side of things, that companies are looking at biotics in this area, and I'm just saying biotics, not just probiotics, is that it's an alternative to psychotropic drugs and things that have serious side effects, right? So if you can treat the microbiota in a better way, well, from the supplement side, we're more proactive about that. That's why I call it mental wellness. So we can do the same thing. But again, strain is key here. The strain is really key, and to figure out what that is. But again, let's go back to these three different pathways here, right? And starting with going back to the HPA. So HPA has to do with the neuroendocrine response system. It's a physiological and physical stress. So this is where we have cortisols involved, right? In terms of secretion, upregulation, downregulation, under chronic stress. So when we're under chronic stress, cortisol is overproduced, okay? But cortisol also possesses immunosuppressant properties. So if you think about it, when it's doing that, it can't deliver its benefit as an anti-inflammatory as well. So again, this balance in the microbiota and affecting this pathway bidirectionally is going to have an impact in terms of the host organism, which is us, in terms of how we react to that.
Makes sense.
Yep. And then I think immune response, again, we're talking about, again, all the receptors for the immune response system are in the gut. So for sure, any kind of dysbiosis or unbalance in the microbiota is going to affect the immune system. We can think of many times about that. Like if you take antibiotics, for example, that affects your microbiota. You're taking that you have an infection or something like that, and that's going to affect your dysbiosis. It's going to cause dysbiosis in the GI tract and affect the microbiota. By the way, nobody has ever mapped out what is a healthy microbiota in terms of organism and count. It's way too complex.
Yeah, I've read a number of different articles. I remember at one time trying to like determine, well, what is it supposed to be? And man, it was all over the board. And it seems that even in different cultures, different places, what looks like a healthy microbiome is different than in other places, you know?
Right. So talking about this immune response pathway, there's tons of research in this area, but and you can go dig into it in more detail. But it's been found that I lost my thought there for a second. Sorry. Short chain fatty acid
Yeah.
are able to. You see the diagram there, the production of
Right.
SCFAs or short chain fatty acids. Okay, so these types of compounds deliver a benefit there in terms of the regulating and functioning of the immune response as well.
Yeah.
Also,
Well, you know, I think a lot of the benefits, many of the benefits from probiotics in general, are attributed to its short chain fatty acid production. You know,
and
not all, but certainly many.
right, and actually a good comment to make here too, in talking about probiotics and postbiotics, for sure, when you get by the time you get a product that's a probiotic on shelf, you're going to have a certain percentage of postbiotic within the supplement. So you're probably getting benefit from both the probiotic that's left as well as the postbiotic complex matrix of metabolites, which includes short chain fatty acids. So, and the other factor in this is how it's affected in the gut. Is it acid resistant? Does it get delivered to small intestine? So all these things, this is why the strain is very specific, right?
Yeah, and I wonder to what extent postbiotics in general are valuable because of the presence of the short chain fatty acids. You know.
It's a complex matrix of metabolites that are released from the cell walls from the organism when it's killed, and that could either happen in the body. It's already happening just from natural oxidation of the organism and the product. All these things. So I think there was one. I don't remember who it was. There was one group doing some research in this area to kind of see in terms of what percentage of the probiotic and postbiotic in a particular supplement, and trying to delineate the benefit that each were contributing there. But I think this is quite complex, and we're probably a long ways from away from understanding that one in a meaningful way, I'd say. But then now let's talk to the last path, neurotransmitters and neurohormones. So you have serotonin, right? 5-hydroxytryptamine, right? That's a neurotransmitter. It's in that path. And also what crosses the blood-brain barrier. All these pathways are bidirectional. So our first brain and our second brain are very much connected. There's also the vagus nerve. So it's you'll see that on the right. It's hard to see in the diagram, but that's the central nervous system is connected to the gut, and things are triggered and messaged going back and forth. Okay.
Oh,
Really,
absolutely. I mean
really important.
that nerve tract gets involved in so many things. In fact, depending upon the research in which you're looking at, you look at something like the use of bitters in traditional medicine, where bitters the bitter taste on the tongue is said to have a response via the vagal nerve and helping to stimulate digestion. In the gut and the stomach and all of that too. So you see that going back, in early days of naturopathic medicine and all that whole discussion of it in herbal medicine. So this falls nicely into that same sort of category.
Yep. And then you've got dopamine, epinephrine, and GABA, which is gamma aminobutyric acid, and glutamate. There's a lot of research on these different neurotransmitters all over the place. And I think one fact, if you think about let's take melatonin for example, to refer back to one of the ingredients you were looking at, the omega 11, right?
Yeah.
Causing the production of DHA, EP, what was it? EPA, right?
EPA, DHA got higher levels from
got higher levels.
Got converted,
because of the presence of being converted from the lung. Okay, so there's some similar pathways here in the neurotransmitters that can do the same thing. So if you think about it, let's take tryptophan, which is at the beginning of the cascade. There's three intermediates to get to melatonin, and that affects sleep and mood. So, supplementation of tryptophan that's getting converted through that pathway, for example, is also an approach to kind of think about.
Well, when I was looking at this some years back, the Bifidobacteria infantis increased plasma levels of tryptophan.
Yeah.
So it's, as a psychobiotic, it may not have produced the actual serotonin, but produced its precursor, one of its precursors.
That's my point here. There's some of that going on. It's not exactly directly targeting that specific neurotransmitter, maybe, but it's doing something else there.
Yeah. Further to your point, yeah.
So so those are kind of the three, and this is a very complex matrix in terms of and making it very challenging for designing clinical studies. But yet there are some companies out there I discovered in mapping this out that have done a ton of research in the psychobiotic area, like dozens of clinical studies for various strains. And I'm going to talk about some specific strains here in just a minute. And there's also a lot of animal models and animal studies as well. But of course, I'm primarily looking for the human clinicals at that stage, because then we're talking about commercialization of how we could do that. Yeah. So I think if you want to play in the realm of psychobiotics in terms of supplements, you got to be proactive, keep your eye on the latest research that's coming out, which is going to preempt, it's going to be before it actually becomes commercially available. And so that's kind of where the interest is for me, is looking at that trends and the research to see where things are going, because you can't just say it's a lactobacillus in general or a bifidobacterium. It's going to be specific strains that deliver the benefit at the end of the day. Going back to our discussion about the intermediates and things like that, are things that are producing, right? The vagus nerve, okay, so what is the vagus nerve? Okay, it's the longest cranial nerve in the body, and it has sensory fibers all over the place, from the brain to the heart to the lungs, the pancreas, everywhere. Liver, stomach, intestine. So that's why when we talk about the vagus nerve, it's probably the principal nerve as part of the CNS or central nervous system that's causing this bidirectional communication between the brain and the gut and things that are going on there. The other intermediate thing to think about is BDNF. You've heard of that, right? It's a neurotropic.
Brain-derived neurotropic.
Right, brain-derived neurotropic factor. Okay, so it is a pretty important, actually. This came up for me when I was studying intermittent fasting, by the way. There's been some research that shows, and this ties to weight loss, right? People think fasting automatically, oh no, I can't do that, whatever. But I've actually been doing intermittent fasting for several years now. And I most of the time stay in a kind of a 16-8 program, where 16 hours fasting, 8 hours, for every 24 hours, 8 hours is my eating period. And it does have an impact on, this is a little bit of an aside, I think, but not really, because it has to do with mental wellness and mental health, right? And that is that some research has shown that BDNF is, that happens when your body goes into the phase of repairing cells. That's where they get upregulation of BDNF. Well, intermittent fasting triggers that. But if you're eating all the time, which is kind of normal for our society, I'd say, in many cultures now that are westernized, it's like eating at all hours. Well, this is not the way your body was designed. So I'm an advocate of intermittent fasting. I always have been, because it allows you to maintain body weight, a healthy body weight, and all of that. But there's other benefits. If your body's expending energy all the time to do processed food that you're intaking, then it never has time to repair cells. And so that's what this fasting period allows. It allows this ability to do that. And there's been research around BDNF being involved in that. So it's kind of interesting. Also, short chain fatty acids, which we already talked about. Any of the aliphatic organic acids like acetate, propionate, butyrate, these are all going to be found. Okay. Let me. Anything you want to add to that, Gene? I was going to kind of talk to some strains.
Just that I just have said that BDNF also is, in and of itself, is a modulator for neurotransmitters. It's been shown to have that benefit too. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole there's so many layers upon what you're saying. So I think of something and I'm like, no, there's just so many layers to talk about.
The take-home message for this whole area is that you've really got to do your homework on this. Is probably I think this is the most complex ingredient area in terms of research and than like botanicals, for example. I think it's way more complex than that. And then if you layer in botanicals with I would even venture to call symbiotics with certain biotics with certain botanicals deliver benefit. Okay, people are looking at the polyphenols as a prebiotic in that, right? So just to kind of rattle off a few strains here, and I actually know many of these quite well because I've looked at the research on them specifically. Bacillus coagulans, NTC 5856. This is a specific strain. That's well known for a lot of research around that for people that are experiencing IBS symptoms and major depressive order. So there's a lot of research around that. It's a spore former, right? So that's good for stability in the gut, that sort of thing. But that's been around a long time. Another one is Bifidobacterium longum 1714. I know these guys very well that produce the strain. And this one has showed benefits in terms of reducing stress and improved memory. But I also happen to know that there are some secondary outcomes around sleep, and they've done some sleep studies on this as well, so affecting mood and sleep. So these cognitive mood, sleep, and stress are very much overlapping here. And it kind of makes sense if you look at the complexity of the pathways we're talking about, right? Especially in that neurotransmitter side, I think is pretty important. Another one is Lactobacillus gasseri CP2305. That's a Japanese company that produces that. That has shown they've got, I think, about 8 clinical studies on that in terms of the benefits there. But things are related around stress, sleeping quality. This is something we explored. And also postbiotic. They call it parabiotic or paraprobiotic. Okay, postbiotic. To me, this is where there's I'd say, absolute 100% consensus among the scientific community. But bottom line is a dead organism, okay? Because you can have an organism that's deactivated and can get reactivated into a probiotic. So it really has to be killed, okay, in terms of that. And then that's when it releases that matrix of metabolites there, which is fascinating. That one's shown a lot of, they've got animal and, other studies as well. There's actually a few that are not even on the list that I have here. And there's more coming out every day, it seems like. In fact, I don't see some of the ones I was talking about earlier. There's one company that's got 2 different psychobiotics. I have a ton of clinical research in stress and mood and sleep and stuff like that. Another one is, let me see. I have my list here because there's so many, Gene.
There's a ton of them.
I'm just randomly picking from my list here. What was another cool one? Oh yeah, there's some combinations too. So those were single single strains. But there's also combinations with there's one that's with Lactobacillus helveticus R0052 with Bifidobacterium longum R0175. I forgot who the company that commercially produces that, but that has shown definitely some benefits there in mental wellness area. And then there's another one. What's the name of the company? It's an 8. Is it 8? 7 or 8 strain combo that shows reduced an overall cognitive reactivity to sad mood. So, it has to do with cognition or whatever. And there's, clinical trial on that. But
there's also one of the ones I mentioned earlier with the Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, which previously was only available through Culturelle. Now it's available.
Yeah.
You can get it at different places.
Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they've got some animal studies as well as clinical as well. And I'll just pick one more here. What's Yeah, there's another one, the Lactobacillus plantarum 90 SK, and it's with Bifidobacterium adolescentus 150. That's an animal study that has showed reduced depressive-like behavior. Okay, which is kind of fascinating. So there's a ton of research ongoing, Gene, in this area, and I think we're going to see more and more. It's an exciting area to stay tuned into because more and more research is emerging every day.
It's a fascinating area. One of the things that strikes me these days, stress, cognition, sleep, all of these areas, and then of course something more serious such as depression or anxiety. But all of those areas have an interrelationship, and the potential for a psychobiotic to be beneficial is huge. I mean, even if you just look at the serotonin modulation, it's huge.
Yeah. So I think it's important to communicate, like we said, I want to stress it again, even though it's like the third time now. You can't just go take a probiotic supplement and think it's a psychobiotic. It doesn't work that way. And so this is where the challenge is, right, on the consumer education piece of this. If you're a product brand that's marketing, obviously there's a challenge in communicating the benefit to the consumer, because to them, for most people, probiotics, if we say biotics and list all of that, the eyes glaze over, because it's to them it's all probiotic, but it's not really. So that's why maybe the focus should be on, in terms of educating consumers, is on what is the benefit that this particular combination or this particular strain is delivering.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's very important, especially when I go to a place, I go to a pharmacy or someplace and they're selling a probiotic, and the ones that they're selling have 10 or 12 strains.
Those are the
tiny amounts of everything. Yeah, it's like,
Again, those are the commodity, what I call commodity, like probiotics or biotics, which means they're not. I mean, they're known in terms of years of research. They've been around a long time, but they don't have specific strain research, and
that's part of the issue. It's kind of like when you also have, so many of these superfood green products out there that have like 50 ingredients, and there's not enough of any one of them to do anything, but but it sure looks good because you got a bunch of stuff in it. And you see that with probiotic formulas too. Doesn't mean all probiotic formulas. There's some of them that are very good and that have had research on them, but others that are just, again, let's toss in everything but the kitchen sink in the probiotic world and call it, a great formula. Not so much.
And I want to call out one last thing, and that has to do with the area of clinical support when you're digging into this. So this is really the onus of this is really on, because consumers have no idea which ones to look at, and they can't possibly go research this themselves. Like I said, it's so complex. But, and that is, normally with probiotics, you're dealing with CFU counts, right? So, which is colony forming units. And so, the regulations changed in the U.S. recently, where in the supplement facts you can report CFUs, but you have to report the milligram amount. So how do you equate milligrams with the benefit? This again, it's stress is even more so, where you got to educate the consumer that 25 milligrams of this postbiotic is going to give you deeper quality of sleep. I'm using an actual example. Okay, so it's not 10 milligrams or whatever, but you're going to have to make that connection with the research, because the consumer is not going to know from a milligram stance. What does that mean?
What does that mean? And that's also a good reason why, if you're using it, you got to make sure you're using something that has been that you've got a good clinical study behind, because if you're expressing it in milligrams and you're using this one and this strain, you want to know that you're getting that actual amount. If you're using the commodity probiotic, you have no idea.
Yeah, and like
if it's
the
enough
whole
of anything.
I think that those kind of products are in that realm of more is better and higher CFU counts, deliver the benefit. Not necessarily. It actually can be quite less. And I think it's really, really important to call out that, especially when we get into postbiotics, because you don't have a CFU count.
No, they're dead.
They're dead. So they're not growing. Hopefully there's no CFU count. Well, then it's not a postbiotic.
That's right.
So there you have to, there's no way around that. You have to connect that to the research. So anybody that's going to market these types of ingredients and products, there's going to have to be human clinical research by default. You see what I'm saying? You can't.
I do.
Not do that. And again, it's going to be very strain specific on that. And anyway, so that's the challenge, but also that's the excitement of where this business is going in that area and stuff like that. And also that means we are out of time, Gene, for this broadcast here. So just to wrap things up, any final thoughts, Gene, from you before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, when it comes to psychobiotics, I mean, there's just so much to think about and talk about. I just echo what you said. I think more research will be coming out. I think this is an area to watch very, very closely. So I think it's fascinating, especially I like the postbiotics area. So beyond that, no, nothing else to add.
Cool. All right, great. Thanks for joining us today. If you were able to do that, if not, again, you can watch this later after post-production. And don't know what we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. We'll be back on our Friday schedule. Gene was traveling, so that's why we're doing it Monday. I know that's probably an inconvenient. Mondays are always busy work days for people. So, but we'll be back on the Friday schedule here for the next one in a couple of weeks, which I'm not sure what the date is on that. But that takes us into June, I think, doesn't it? Early June.
I think you're right.
June 3rd, is it? June 3rd, maybe.
Could be.
Could be. Anyway, that's all the time we have today. And so we'll see you when we see you. All right. Take care.
Indeed. Take care.